Hi, I'm Barbara Gannell, and I was initially from uh, Beulah Baptist Church. I've been part of the church for a long time, and I think the merger was an absolute necessity for both churches um, due to different circumstances from each of the churches. Not only was it a necessity, but it was just a wonderful merger. The memories of the process, that I have, I was not part of the board at the time, so I really was not involved in all the multiple meetings that went on. But my connection or the information that I received was from Hugh Tucker, who was on the board and was part of the process along with many, many other men in order to make this happen. And they did a wonderful job. When the churches voted on a new name, I cannot remember voting, but I have always liked the name Cornerstone. So, whether or not that's the one I would have chosen, I'm not sure, but probably. Someone that I met from the other church. Now, because I played baseball, I'm one of these unique people. I was involved in both churches because I originally have been from Beulah since I was about 8 years old. But what happened is for a couple of years, I attended Gratiot Avenue Baptist Church, and I was married at Gratiot. And so I played softball. So I knew people like Phyllis Dingler, though she did not play ball. I knew Joan Martin and like Marilyn Lowy. But the person that I met after the merger that I had never met before was Marty Odell. I was working in the junior high school group, and in she walked with her daughter Tiffany. And lo and behold, we got to be friends, and to this day, we're very good friends. So how did the merger change my life, or how did I use the merger in my life? In thinking about this, the biggest thing is the friends that I have because of the merger. Yes, I knew Joan Martin and I knew Marilyn Lowy, but it's different now because we're in the same Sunday school class, have been for, well, not 100 years, but almost. And so it's been a long while, but basically that's what the merger did for my life. One of my memories from playing softball with Marilyn and Joan, and as I said, Phyllis didn't play ball, but she was there as a cheerleader. But Marilyn was playing third base one time in one game, and she actually had a triple play all by herself. What she did is she caught the ball. She was playing third, so she caught the ball, tagged third base because the runner had left to go home, and got that out. And then the person running from second to third was running so fast and didn't think about it, and Marilyn tagged that person. So that was a pretty exciting time for all of us, and especially for Marilyn. Thank you.
Hi. This is Tom and Bev Edwards. We were former members of Gratiot and joined Cornerstone at its very beginning, 40 years ago? Doesn't seem like 40 years ago, but I guess it is. So I guess one of the thoughts is what we thought of the merger at the time. And I thought it was a good idea because the numbers in both churches were going down. They were small. I know at Gratiot it was an older congregation, so it was a good idea. I personally did not have any part of the discussions concerning a merger, but it was the right thing to do at the time.
Both congregations, as he mentioned, were getting smaller, and we were without a senior pastor. I think Dick Hatfield was probably our last pastor that left in fall of 81. And so we were without a senior pastor, but we had a youth pastor, and Frank Mills and Ted Marsh was mission pastor. So we didn't have a senior pastor, but Beulah did. And so it seemed to dovetail together very nicely, and seemed like a good possibility. We, as far as location, we probably had the nicer facility. We had an educational building wing that we'd added on. Gratiot Christian, it started the year we moved, 83, I believe. No, or maybe that's just when I joined it. Anyhow, our last week there, our car got stolen out of, our brand new car, mind you, got stolen out of the church parking lot. So the location was not ideal for us in our current facility, where the Beulah facility was newer, well, further north, and worked better for the church. As far as the, go ahead.
Memories of the process. We were not directly involved in the negotiating that was going on.
Other than serving on the advisory
Yeah,
board.
but that was it. That was really it. So I don't really have any. It seemed to work well. New name for Cornerstone. How was it voted? There were 3 or 4 choices for names: Cornerstone, Covenant, Manual, and Grace. I personally voted for Emmanuel, but Cornerstone turned out to be a good choice.
And I remember some of the discussion on that too. I didn't really have a strong preference. I don't think Cornerstone necessarily stood out to me at the time that, oh yeah, that's the way to go. I think I was probably leaning more towards Emmanuel, but I like the name that we chose, and it seems very fitting and appropriate. Backing up for just a minute on some of the memories of the process, maybe of some more in terms of once we got together, I thought the fit was good. It wasn't you're from there and we're from here. It just seemed to mesh together well right from the get-go. And people that we met initially, some are still around, some are not. We became one body very quickly, and that's because of the commonality we have in Jesus Christ, obviously.
I guess the point to make on that is that probably in the first service, nobody was saying, "Get out of my seat, that's my seat." So it worked well. Who is someone that we may have met from the other church? I really don't.
Some of the people.
I don't recall. 40 years is a long time. I can't.
Well, some of the people I can recall aren't here anymore. Hugh and Peggy Tucker, Mabel Fluker and Willie May and Ken Berg. Yes, they were very involved in the church when we met. Hal Fletcher, I'm trying to think. Charlene Hutek and John. Those are some that come to mind off the top of my head. But as Tom said, 40 years ago was a long time. As far as God using the merger in our lives.
I think I guess what it showed is what I mentioned earlier, is that everything just fit, and the merger was such that God knows what He's doing, and it was just time to move. Both churches were low in attendance, and it just fit very nicely. And as we can see today, it was God was in it, and was the right move to make.
I don't think anyone likes to be in a dying organization of any kind. The fact that putting the two parts together to make a new body, the church seemed to thrive and have a new energy again. And I think that was helpful. Another plus or bonus, or however you want to say, result of the merger was bringing Bob Johnson here. My life has been so blessed having him here. I've learned a lot more. Not that we haven't had good pastors in in our past history, but just the expository way he teaches. I've learned to appreciate music more. As far as I used to think of it, I think more in terms of, okay, it's like the introduction. Let's get to the meat. Let's get to the sermon. Where now I can appreciate that as part of my worship. And the music really touches my heart. And not so unusual to see tears running down my cheeks while I'm singing in church. But he just has brought a lot to the church and to my life with his involvement here as well.
I was fortunate to be involved in the Pulpit Committee at the time that Bob came, and we were without a pastor and we're looking for one. And the two things that I remember initially about Bob that just struck me home as being, he's the guy we should have. And if I recall, it took something like, we met him 1 year at the time, the first time we met him, and he said, no, I really can't think about moving now. He was an associate pastor at another church. And he said, I really can't think about moving now because there's an issue that should be resolved first, at the church. And that struck me as being his concern for the life of the church. And secondly, he says, that if I do come or when, whatever, I'm going to be there for a long time. I'm not going to be there, it's going to be a long time. I'm going to come to stay. And those two comments really impressed me about him at the time. As you can tell, it worked out very well.
What did you think about the merger? Gratiot was losing people. We were without a pastor. People were moving out of Detroit and into the suburbs or to a suburban church. And we were looking for a method to fix that issue. And one of them was to merge with a church in the suburbs. And Beulah had a similar situation. I don't know the details of it, but they had lost a pastor and it wasn't a pleasant situation. And they had gotten a new pastor and attendance was not up significantly. So they just made sense to us to have a conversation. We invited a person who worked with a guy from our church. I don't remember their names, but they chatted about the possibility of a merger, and it did not seem like it would make sense, and it was set aside. At that point, I went from being excited about a possibility to being discouraged, and yet in the end, God worked it out in such an incredible way that it was exciting to be a part of. It was a layperson's discussion. The pastors were not involved. Gratiot was without a senior pastor, and it had a youth pastor. Beulah was without a youth pastor, but had a senior pastor. And that worked out well, but the pastoral staff was not involved in the early conversations about the merger. It was done by lay people, which turned out to be just a neat thing to watch as well. What memories do you have of the whole process? It was one of the more exciting things I ever was able to watch. I was discouraged. A lot of people had left Gratiot to move to a suburban church. I felt like I needed to stay. I had no idea why, but God worked it out to produce a merger, which God was just such an influence in that whole process. It was neat to watch. It was neat to be a part of. Although the need for a merger was important to both churches, the blending was a God thing every step of the way. So one example of that is when we tried to merge the Sunday schools. Clint Lowy was the chairman of the Sunday school at Gratiot, and I believe Tom Little was the chairman at Beulah. And they both wanted to maintain the role and authority in their particular church area. And so we just had them get together. Both were excited about what their responsibility was, and yet their personalities were so different from one another that there are a lot of reasons to doubt that it would ever come about. And yet it did, and they agreed to have a merged leadership role as opposed to merging the Sunday schools, and it went really, really well. That was exciting to watch. For your choice for a name, Cornerstone was my choice. Grace would have been fine, except there were already a number of Grace churches around. Cornerstone was a rather newish church name at that time. Now it's not, but it just put Christ in his proper place, and was a joy to pick and watch that happen. Who are some of the people that you met at the other church? In this case, that I met from Beulah. 4 people. I admire all 4 of them. They're very different from one another, but Leo Krapp was just a joy, a leader, just a good man to get to know. Hugh Tucker, more strong in his personality, and yet I got along fine with him and just grew in our friendship. Glenn Munger was another one, just a joy to get to know and a joy to have time to fellowship with. And Emmett Moore, what an incredible man he was, and a lawyer, very intelligent, very easy to get along with, just a joy to be a part of that conversation and those conversations and get to know Emmett so well. How did God use the merger in your life? Well, like I said, I was disappointed in the process that Gratiot was in. I think that Beulah wasn't so different than Gratiot in that they had lost a pastor under some not so good experiences. They had lost people. And I was a little discouraged, and God made it all happen. And it was a joy to watch things that shouldn't be possible become possible. I remember since then talking to different churches about merging, and there's no good examples of what took place other than God worked it out. And that was a real huge joy for me to watch and to be a part of, and to watch what's happened since. It has been a joy to get to know the people at Beulah. Today, nobody keeps track of who was from where, and that too is part of the joy of the merger.
Hello, this is Bill Dengler, and I'm here to talk about the merger of churches of Gratiot Avenue and Beulah Baptist. And so, what did I think of the merger? Initially, actually, I think that the merger actually started with myself and the key player, John Lightbody, who also knew Tom Little from Beulah. He was friends with Tom, so he said, I've been talking to Tom, and I thought maybe it might be a good idea if we think about merging the 2 churches that were both in declined membership, and one has a pastor and the other doesn't, and one has a choir director and the other doesn't. So we said we got all the pieces together for one merged church. So we thought, well, we'll give it a shot. So we called a meeting with the 2 churches, and talked about it for a while, and everybody went away saying, we'll think about it. And that went on for maybe a month or 2. And finally, John said to me one day, we're going to get a meeting going. So we got together again, and the pastor from their church joined us, and we thought we had a good possibility. So each group decided to go back to their church and present it to the membership. And the memberships also thought that it might be a good idea because both churches were in a state of possibly going under. So they had the building, and we wanted to get rid of our building in Detroit. Gratiot did. So we gathered together and set a date, and we met at their church facility, and things went really well, I thought. So the merger was had its beginning that way.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Dengler. And as I think about the merger initially, I guess I thought it was a good idea too. Things were happening in the parking lot every Sunday at Gratiot, which was not a good thing. And even though we had a wonderful big facility and a school, it just seemed the area was not going to be suitable for very long. So I guess I thought the merger was a good idea too. And we knew a few of the people from baseball. So instead of being competitors, we'd have more baseball teams.
When the churches voted, both churches voted positive. They decided to give it a chance and see what we could do. So we had a first Sunday meeting. I remember that we had a dinner or luncheon afterwards in the basement, and their church had excellent facilities for that, and cooks. Virginia Vanover and Peggy Tucker and a number of people there were really good, and they did Wednesday night dinners too to invite the neighborhood in and for prayer meeting time, and they have a free what was it? I think it was $1 or so for dinner, but anyway, we had the vote. We voted on the name. That was, people presented names, and I guess there were the four top ones: Cornerstone, Covenant, Emmanuel, and Grace. And then we took a vote, and our best recollection is that Cornerstone was the landslide victor in the name of the church. So that's how we got the name. And the church again had, like I say, pieces that each growing church would like to have. People that were organized Bible schools and things for the children, kids, which we didn't have many of. They had all moved out. So our church was just old people. Theirs was some old people and some young people and kids, and it worked out really good. And then
It wasn't just old people, because we were there and we weren't old 40 years ago.
Yeah. Well,
But coming back to the names, I guess I voted for Covenant. I thought that was a pretty biblical, traditional name. And I guess that's the kind of person I am. So Covenant was the one I picked, but Cornerstone was a landslide. And that's what we're called, Cornerstone. Some people that I met there was Peggy Tucker, Virginia Vanover, and Dave. We knew Hugh from baseball, and Nora, Whipple, and Marv, Leo, and Muriel Crapp. And so it really was a nice time to get to know a lot of other Christians. Our Sunday school class was mostly people from Gratiot. Bill and Barb Gannell were in there, and the Tuckers. Dave and Virginia were in the Bicota class because she couldn't walk the steps. We were in the basement. And so there was quite a few. The pastor was our Sunday school teacher for quite a while. And then I think Bill Cameron may have been our next Sunday school teacher, Bill and Vivian. And I really think the merger was a wonderful thing. We still have these lifelong friends, 40 years already. for the people that we met back then. And Cornerstone, in our opinion, is still going strong. I'm happy to celebrate 40 years of God's blessings.
Some of the people that I met too, I knew Hugh Tucker from baseball, but it was a different relationship than what it was when we got together in the church, and we became the best of friends. And I think of Willard Ballard, that he was another fellow that was an immense help to me and made some real changes in my life, and even Tucker's too. But a thing I noticed, we were afraid of when we merged was it was going to be a thing of our case of them and us, and it didn't take long for us to merge into one. And you very seldom, I don't think I ever heard of anybody saying, well, it's those guys do this and we do that. And we just seemed to blend together. And I think the Lord was really in it. And we were able to do some really good things in ministry just because of the attitudes of all the people that and the resulting church. So I was pleased with the whole thing, and I still am.
I'm Phyllis Dengler, and the merger between Gratiot and Beulah was not like some mergers where one church was fully staffed and the other just moved in. Both of the churches had needs. Beulah had a pastor, and Gratiot had a youth pastor. And they had an organist, and we had a pianist. And we both had similar or the same missionaries. So the merger just really flowed nicely and smoothly, and it was really wonderful. What we had at that time was called the Missionary Society, the Ladies Missionary Society. And I was the president, and Peggy Tucker was the vice president. And we had about 8 or 10 different circles. Some met in the daytime and some in the evening. And we actually sewed. And we made different things that the missionaries had requested. If we couldn't make them, we'd buy them. And in the fall of the year, we packed big boxes and sent to the missionary families. And when the mailing got prohibitive and sometimes the custom costs for the missionaries was exorbitant, and actually sometimes their packages were broken into and things were taken out of them before they ever got them. So we ended that, and we opened a missionary closet where we put the items that we sewed or bought. And when they came to the church, they could take whatever they needed out of their closet. Both of the churches had young people that grew up in the church that decided to be missionaries. Most of them met their mates at college, and we supported them as a married couple when they went to the field. One unique couple was Frank Mills, who was our youth pastor, and Karen Murphy, who was from Beulah. And so they married. They met working as teachers in a Christian school before the merger and got married. And they worked as the youth pastor and wife and family for about 6 years, first at Gratiot and then at Cornerstone. And eventually they felt the call to be missionaries in youth ministry in various places in the world. So they went out as missionaries, and our church supported them too. Some of the couples, we each had together we had about 20 kids that became missionaries that we supported. One couple, both of them grew up at Beulah, which was not the norm for the rest of the couples. And they got married and went out. So that was really neat. Some of the families that we were supporting for years had children who eventually became missionaries, who we also supported. One of those families was Pete and Sadie Ackley, who Beulah had right from the start of their ministry. And their son, Dick, and his wife, Meg, also became missionaries to Africa. And actually, they are still working with their mission. And Dr. Dwight and Barb Slater, he was a doctor. They went to Africa also. And two of their sons became missionaries. One, after he retired, became the pastor at Highland Park Baptist. And the other one is Kirk and his wife, Laura, who we are supporting now. And they were actually here from Africa last fall, and they came to visit our church. And one more couple was Dick and Vicki Gasho. And they had two sons that went into the ministry, Adam and Bethel, and Rick and Christy. And just a few weeks ago, Rick and Christy were here visiting, and they serve in the Czech Republic. One missionary couple who Beulah served right from the beginning was Ralph and Stella Cox. They were missionaries in Japan. And we are still supporting Stella, who is in her 90s. Two of the missionaries that Beulah supported right from the beginning were Ralph and Stella Cox, and they were missionaries to Japan. And we are still supporting Stella. She is in her 90s, and she is still ministering to people in Japan. So all through the years, the strong gospel has gone out faithfully, both at home and on the mission field. And for that, we give all the glory to God.
I'm Wayne Ackerman. Originally went to Beulah Baptist before the merger. When the merger originally came up, first thing that came to mind was that's a good idea because it was two really old, well-established churches, but they had diminished attendance at the time. And I had been at Beulah for about 6-7 years when the original merger came up. I did not participate in any of the merger talks. That was reserved for the 40-somethings that had been there forever. But the merger was a good idea. The hard part would have been the process itself when they were going through the motions, trying to match up the doctrines, trying to match up how they managed the church, what roles people would have. And Gratiot at the time was a little bit bigger. It was probably a third bigger than Beulah. So there was always a concern in the background that this bigger church would come over and take over Beulah and all the things that would happen because we would do it their way. We've always done it this way. But that didn't happen. That was the people that worked on it worked out very diligently, very succinctly. They put together some safeguards where they had not too many people on each board recommended from each side of each church to try to keep it normalized. And the process went very, very smoothly. When they brought it to Beulah, I remember voting for Grace because there was no Grace Baptist in the area. I didn't even know what covenant meant probably at the time. There was Emmanuel, but most of those at the time were Lutheran churches, and Cornerstone didn't even come to my mind. But Grace was the one that I voted for. when we finally did get together, I met a lot of the people previously from playing basketball at Beulah for 6-7 years and softball. And the one that comes to mind really is Ted Zen. Ted Zed's no longer with us here, but Ted Zen was a stocky, stubborn softball player. And we had played against Gratiot for a number of years. And there was this third baseman. Every time I got near third base, he tripped me going around third base. I always thought that was Ken O'Brien Sr. But it wasn't until we merged that I found out it was Ted Zen. And he was just a real stubborn Russian player. And it wasn't a few years later that we actually moved out into Clinton Township, moved right down the street from him. So he became my neighbor. And towards the end of his, after he retired here at Cornerstone, he was kind of known for walking around. He always had a pocket full of silver coins, whether they were $50 or dollars. And if the kids would go up and ask him for one, he'd just reach in his pocket and give them a $50 or a silver dollar. And I don't think they knew what it was, but it was pretty special at the time. Somebody other that I met from the church, I met Hopchicks, O'Briens, Light Bodies came from that church. Martins came from the church. Harvey's still running around here today, the old H-bomb. But those are people that were, again, they were basketball and they were baseball players, and that's where I knew them from. When it all settled and done, when everybody got together, it wasn't a year and a half before we started putting together new boards and people were meshing and you could walk down the hall. And because of the size of the church, you didn't know everybody, but it was a whole lot easier when there were 300 people than having 1,000 people. So you got to know people, you got to know what they did, what they were. And today there's a dozen people from that merger that I still sit on boards with, still play softball with, don't play any basketball anymore, but still see regular here at Cornerstone. So it was a great decision that was made at the time by those folks, and a great decision has come to fruition here at Cornerstone.
Hi, I'm Joe Kopchik. I grew up at Gratiot Avenue Baptist Church, and when news of the merger came, it was a little bit of a shock, but thinking back, realistically, it was the thing to do. We were a declining membership with no pastor and way more facility than we needed for the membership that we had. The specific process, I have no recollection of, but I do remember we had to vote on a name, and I don't remember who I voted for. It seems to me I did not vote for Cornerstone because I wanted to be more conventional, so I probably would have voted for Grace of all those names, but I'm glad Cornerstone won. When the church was merged, we did a unique thing, I think. We had to figure out a way to get to know people, and so committees were formed, and people from both congregations were put on one committee. For example, Sandy and I were put on a social committee with the Tiganellis and the Morgans. So we got to know them a little more closely. But in actuality, I did know some people, at least by name, because we had a pretty hot competition on Friday nights at Baldock. The softball teams would play, so we knew who we were going to beat that Friday when we met. How did God use the merger in my life? It was unique. I think it presented some unique opportunities for service. I've done some things in ministry that I look at that I would not have done probably if we had stayed a small congregation, a dying congregation in Detroit. So when we merged, committees were formed, and on those committees, people from both congregations were put on these committees to work together. And we were put with the Morgans and the Tiganellis, so we get to know them a little better. And in reality, I knew some names of guys from the softball team we played on Friday night at Baldock, and I knew the Ackermans, and I knew UTEC, and others, Tuckers, for example, would show up on those Friday nights. So we got to know them a little bit, and through softball, and now through the merger, we got to know them even better. The merger has given me great opportunities, I think greater opportunities for service through the through teaching, through music, through the valet service, just doing all kinds of things in the church has been something that I probably would not have experienced had we not come to the point of merger.
My name is Marilyn Lowy, and I became a member of Gratiot Avenue Baptist Church when I was in my teens after I graduated from high school. And it was a great experience for me. I had come from a small church in the country, so it was totally different for me. And I loved it. And I love the large church. And as things began to change and our church attendance began to dwindle, it was difficult. It was difficult just to see us go down. So when the merger was brought before us, I thought it was a great thing. I just felt like this was something that the Lord had for us as a church and for me as an individual, and as for my family. I just thought, especially for my young teen children, I just thought it was a great thing. And the memories are, it was an emotional time, very emotional. Many wonderful things had happened in my life during the years that I was there. I met my husband there. I was married there. My children were adopted there, and just so many wonderful things had happened. So it was an emotional time to think that all this was coming to an end. I knew it was just a building, and my memories would still be be there, but it was a very difficult time for me. At that time, I was working in the church office as part-time as a church secretary. And I remember one lunch hour, I went outside into the yard, and we were very near moving. And I just, through my tears, I poured my heart out to the Lord and asked him that he would help me to embrace what was before us as a church and to help me in this process. And of course, he answered that prayer, and it was a wonderful thing that happened to us as a church. It was good for me, and it was good for my family, and it was good for us as a church. I really don't remember who I voted for. I just don't remember, but I'm happy with Cornerstone. It's a great name, and it's just great. I'm happy with it. I think in the beginning, one of the couples in our Sunday school class was Hugh and Peggy Tucker, and that they are the first people that I remember becoming acquainted with, and we did as a couple, my husband and I. And they were gracious, and it was their church. So moving into a new building, I felt like it was them accepting us. So it was, anyway, they were wonderful. And Hugh has now deceased, but Peggy and I are still great friends. So I appreciated that new friendship. Thinking back, on how the Lord worked in my life during this process of the merger. As I said, I was working in the church office, and whenever Joan and I shared that position, so we already had two people filling that position. And of course, when we merged, then Beulah had a secretary, so there was three of us sharing one job. And I was apprehensive about how is that going to work? Three of us working, together in one office. And just accepting changes in the way that the church at Gratiot, we were more formal. And I don't know if I acquainted that with being more spiritual or what, but there were so many things that were different. And I just really had to pray about having the Lord change my thinking and to be accepting of change. Just because we had done things one particular way didn't mean that it was the right way or the only way. But the Lord grew me in that process of accepting change and accepting different things. So And during that process of working in the church office, I just feel like the Lord used me during those years. And I'm just grateful for this whole process and where we are now. Just can't thank him enough for the way he has worked things out, and just seeing his hand work through it all. It's been wonderful. My memory of our first Sunday after the merger was just fantastic. The church was full to capacity, probably over. I think they had to set up folding chairs in the aisles. The presence of the Lord was just so evident, and the singing was just, I don't know, it'd be like the heavenly choir singing to me. It was just great. The whole service was wonderful. But not so much that first Sunday, but in Sundays following, it was so evident to me that at Gratiot, everything was more formal and just planned out, and it was just very formal. And when we moved into the new building and as Cornerstone, it was just so informal. The service was just so informal, especially like the communion. It was just, the informality was difficult to get used to. But I guess that's something I had to adjust to. That first Sunday, Dave Vanover was leading the singing and making the announcements, and he had a question about something. So he just asked someone in the audience to elaborate on it, and they stood up and gave the information he was seeking. And I thought, that would never have happened at Gratiot. That was just so out of place in a church service, but that's just the way it was. And that's something else I had to adapt to and get over, that formality feeling. But then later on, it became, some of those things leveled out, and it was great.
Who is someone you met from the other church? I would say Terry O'Brien. He became a good friend. We ended up playing ball together. We worked on choir staging for Christmas concerts, Easter concerts. We served on the building committees a couple times, and he taught in one of my ABFs. Anyway, I always enjoyed his teaching, very practical, and he was always an encouragement to me. I think without the merger that I would never have met the many good Christian friends that I have today. Some I knew as a direct result of the merger. A number of people that came from Gratiot have become lifelong friends. But also the merger created a church that was faithful in preaching the word. And because of that, I believe it's drawn a number of new people here over the years. And with those people have come new friendships. And lifelong friendships. People that have prayed for me during difficult circumstances, been an encouragement to me, and are just good friends. And so I would say the people that have come into my life because of the merger has been a blessing to me, my family. Thanks.
I'm Brian DeMann. Initially, I thought the merger was perhaps a charitable thing to do. I think we can celebrate that 40 years ago, we left a new 3-story Christian school building at 7 and 10 years prior to leaving it. On the other hand, I feel a little like I was part of a business that was leaving a not-so-profitable neighborhood. We merged with another Ashland Baptist Church's trustee, Mr. Paul Kleist. He went by the name Bud for those who know the Lattas and Kleist. Mr. Kleist wrote the vouchers as a trustee, and as the building fund treasurer, I wrote the checks, invested funds, balanced the books, and worked the abstracts and wrote the reports. I remember that the merger was more difficult because of a parking lot issue. The church had successfully shared a parking lot with AMP, type grocery store, but after the grocery store closed, the church had to practically buy the entire neighborhood of stores just to own the parking lot. What does a church do with a bar? frequent it? Use it to mingle with the neighborhood? Or shut it down by not renewing the business owner's lease? We held an 18% mortgage for a bike shop. Do we hang on to it after we merge and leave? I told them that I did not think there was any way we could beat the return. Yet, when they asked me what I would do, I told them that I would accept the 10% discount and leave. In spite of Ken O'Brien's offer to help, that's what we did. I might have lost the church $4,000. My own advice and actions often different. The church was not cash poor back then. I remember showing a little bit too much initiative. Instead of investing in treasury bills, that was before the